My name is Frido Sielemann. I'm the Counselor for Energy and Environmental Questions at the German Embassy. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all and to thank the organizers from and our hosts from Georgia Tech, to thank the Ecologic Institute, people from Embassy's consulate, and all our special guests here. It's my pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Christian Egenhofer. And since we're here at the European Union Center of Excellence, I find it very fitting that we have in Mr. Egenhofer an extremely European person. If you look at his bio and see where he has studied and where he has been working, you'll find the places in Bruges, in Belgium, in Natolin in Poland, in Paris, in Rome. Also, he was in, or still is, I think, he was in Dundee, in Scotland. So many places where he has taught and worked. And he has an extremely large list of publications. I once went through that before coming here, and it's really impressive, and it shows him as an expert on all matters energy and also climate. And I think he is the best person we could have in this context to talk about framework for clean energy in the US and Europe. After all, in Europe, I'm, for instance, I'm from Germany, and we have our own energy and climate policy, but a large part of the framework is being taken care of by the European Union. He is not with the European Union, but he's from a think tank from Brussels and an expert on anything that is European there. So I won't spend more time on introducing him. I think it's time for him to speak. After all, we're a little behind schedule after all. I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion this afternoon, and I hope you all will find it interesting afterwards, and we will all take away lots of good ideas on the issue of clean energy in the US and Europe. So welcome again, and I hope we'll have an interesting afternoon. Thank you.
So, thank you, Frido, for your kind words. Thank you also, Georgia Tech, Ecologic, and the German Embassy and Vicky Birchfield for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. It's always a great pleasure coming to the US. And it's an even bigger pleasure and privilege, I should add, to speak in the US about economic growth from a European perspective. The general perception is Europe is slow growth, low dynamics, high unemployment. So obviously there seems to be somewhat different perspective if you come to green growth and this kind of aspects. But let me say first who we are and who I am. I'm heading the Energy and Climate Program of the Center for European Policy Studies, which is a Brussels-based think tank. I should stress that it's independent of the EU. We deal with all EU policies, and currently you can imagine we deal about 2/3 about the euro, but that might and will eventually change, we assume. We are working both on policy design, but always with a view of actually getting it done. It's easy to have grand plans, but we look and work with the institutions how we can get them implemented and actually getting them operational and efficient. My view will be very EU-centric. You wouldn't expect anything else from somebody from Brussels. You know, it's up to you to choose whether this is positive or negative. I'm neutral on this. Now, on clean growth is a rather old EU debate. I think actually it is a rather old debate in many other parts, starting in the late 80s and going over into the new century within OECD, and it was related to environmental tax reform, internalize external costs, increase the cost on raw materials, energy, and we have a lot of examples in Europe, Nordic countries, Germany, Netherlands, the UK, and others, and also in a proposal which then was withheld on the EU CO2 tax. The focus then was very much on efficiency, labor markets, so it was more in the context of structural reform, as we would call it. Now, as climate change was always high on the EU agenda from very early onwards, you might know that already in 1996, the EU decided to adopt 2 degrees Celsius target to keep global warming to these 2 degrees. So it was quite logical to have a link between climate change and growth, economic growth. On the other hand, that was in a way the beginning of this green growth concept. In the EU, climate change policy from the very beginning was about integration with other policies. And so in the context of the climate change policy formulation, we always had a strong focus on co-benefits. Of course, local air pollution was one of those, security of energy supply. But then over time, we came to macroeconomic benefits or effects, technological leadership, job creation, and we are back to the green growth. That was the first time formalized in the 2000 Lisbon economic reform agenda, which largely has failed. But then it came back and reinforced in the 2007-2008 climate and energy package. You remember this is the package where the EU set itself 20 reduction objectives, legally binding 20% greenhouse gas reductions compared to 1990 by 2020, 20% renewables, and also legally binding and 20% increase of energy efficiency, not legally binding. And this was then brought up, this concept about the new industrial revolution. And finally, fully established, I think it's fair to say, this green growth paradigm, if you wish, was within the Europe 2020 strategy, which is the EU's growth and industrial policy. It's at the moment a mission statement, so it's very much at the declamatory level, but it is the most important reference for EU policymaking for the next 5 to 10 years, and their sustainable growth is one of the 3 pillars. Now, here is some language. I should add that the focus has now shifted from structural reform to more competitiveness in a broader sense, not just labor market reform, but to competitiveness. Now, some language to give you just to give some sense. The climate and energy package was meant to transform Europe, at the bottom here, into a highly energy efficient and low greenhouse gas emitting economy. And in the Europe 2020 strategy from 2010, here you have a reference to low carbon economy, new green technologies, and at the end, helping consumers to make well-informed choices. That means, the market in the end should drive it, and not just by government regulation and so on, which is sometimes the perception as well. Now, so far, this is now the declaratory level, the political level. This is what's the objective. Now let's look at how to make these things happen. And as we all know, it's something to declare, and it's something a little bit more difficult to implement it. And actually, it is difficult, and I'm sure that in other parts of the world, people are struggling with the same kind of issues. And I'm trying to highlight a number of points that are still open and they are considered at the moment, and trying to give a bit of a flavor which way the European Union is going which the European Union is going to do. Now, focus is of this green growth agenda from the political level. From the political level is technology, technology support. And my presentation here is really about energy technology, which is crucial, but it has a lot of very specific features. So don't look here at the domestic sector and so on, but it's really about energy technology. Don't be mistaken. It is the core, but a lot of specific features. Now, in the context of the EU 2007-2008 energy package with the 2020 targets, greenhouse gas reduction targets, renewable energy targets legally binding, governments, the EU tries to increase the natural rate of investment in low carbon technology. This is not just incremental improvement or speeding up the incremental. This is about technological step change. Moving from one high carbon technology to a completely new kind of technology. It's not like, you know, it's like moving from aircraft to Apollo. It's not just improving the aircraft until it becomes a rocket. You know, it's something different, is a different technology. This is, I think, unprecedented in a way that means we are not just moving from the government side by providing R&D, because R&D support for basic research, which is something which has always been done, but also moving into the demonstration and the deployment side. And this is a very different game, a different scale, and also different financial aspect, and that is, of course, important to keep in mind. Now, there are a number of difficulties associated with this, and here you have those. Some are related to the macroeconomic situation, subsidies. Globally, we still subsidize fossil fuels very heavily. It's about $300 to $500 billion per year, depending on how high the oil price is. I guess this year it's going to be rather in the 500 than in the 300 again. And then there's still a lack of internalization of external costs. Of course, we could argue forever how big these internalizations should be. Now, this is the macroeconomic. This is well established. No need to dwell much further on it. But there are a number of technology specific technology-related issues, and they relate to the market and the financial risks. Very often, low-carbon technologies have bringing them to the market from the very beginning, from the R&D to bring them and make them profitable, takes too long to be profitable from a private investor's point of view, so there is a disincentive there. Technology risk, a lot of these technologies, and here we talk about energy technology, are big technology which are risky, you know, carbon capture and storage, you know, if it's not accepted and so on, but if it also the technology fails. So here there is a risk in demonstration and deployment, and again, from a private investor, the risk and the reward ratio may not be a good one. And traditional, the third part here, traditional technologies, of course, benefit from the status quo. We have well-established infrastructures, roads, and so on. And now if you bring gas stations and oil infrastructure, gas infrastructure, now you bring suddenly new technologies onto the market which need new infrastructures. They need to be built, and they're very costly, but also taking the old ones out is also very costly because you depreciate the capital. Then finally, the market failures we had, it's an old established technology issue, and the R&D investment is very often not rewarded by the market. Also, this is something we had before, but it just adds on to this challenging task, to bringing these new technologies, new set of technologies as step change of technologies. Now, of course, you know, we could very easily regulate this by having a very high carbon price. Now I'm looking to our politician here, and also in Europe, to have a very high carbon price is not that easy to implement as it's sometimes seen. Now, that would be part of the solution. Now, I'm guessing there are limits to this, and we might be hearing more of this. So we are, in a way, back to providing support along the innovation chain. And I have here separated the innovation chain into R&D, which is to the left, then the demonstration part, and then you come to the deployment part, and I'm trying to explain that in a moment. This is about energy technologies such as bioenergy, wind, solar, nuclear, and what have you, carbon capture and storage as well. Now, the first part, basic R&D, that has been a traditional area where governments have supported. We talk about 1, 2, 3, 5% of government support to the private sector for whatever reasons. But the interesting part is really, the interesting part then is the middle part here when you come to the area of demonstration, when you move over from demonstration to deployment, which is the technological death risk area. There is a lot of risk involved, and there the private investor need bridge capital. Now, this is rather significant, and here we have on the one hand side the issue of governments, you know, in times of austerities, don't necessarily have the means available, or it's not very popular. On the other hand, if you keep that support for too long, you create enormous economic rents. And we see this in some of the renewables. So how do we get around there? And the EU solution at the moment is to come up with blending and financial engineering. That means you put loans, loan guarantees, and all these things together to target the very specific risk. There's a financial risk you target with one, there is an economic risk, there is a technology risks, and there is a political risk, so you try to target all of them to pay off one after the other, because what you don't want, and here I'm coming back to this argument of scale, what you don't want is that all this support goes into the bottom line of companies. That's, of course, will make the whole system rather not sustainable politically in the longer term. So very specific tools, engineering tools are currently developed in the EU in the context of the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, which is called SET Plan, and we are going to actually today, one of an additional publication went on to the net on our website if you are interesting. I don't know whether this is a sign that I'm speaking for too long or whether it's just the service without any consideration. Now, then you move over, then here to, you have overcome the technology death risk, then you move over to the private zone, and here already more and more private investment come in, venture capital and so on, so the government intervention is far less, and also that the risk of rents becomes far less important. Of course, the key element, and here I come back to my initial comment, is, you know, you create revenues, you can increase revenues, of course, by having a higher carbon price. Now here we have this issue of acceptability and how far you can actually go. So I'm coming to pretty much end of my presentation. Let me just sum up some of the key challenges from the EU perspective. Energy technology. There is, of course, this need to phase out fossil subsidies, and there is you know, I just don't see, for example, if you move from combustion engine cars to EV cars, if the fuel price is very low. I mean, the bill gets very, very, very high. To subsidize it, there has to be some pull factor from the market. The question of excessive rents I have mentioned. We have a lot of literature in Europe, also in Germany, about rents for renewable technology support. And of course, if you go really in big scale, the multiplication of these rents become big, and the political acceptability will become very important. And I guess we get in Europe, in Germany now, a big discussion on this. Now, the third one is quite interesting. Actually, we all agree that the whole system should be technology neutral, but we know the technologies we want to support. So how do you actually pick winners without picking the winners? Because if you invest in infrastructures, that means this is the one we want. If you move towards centralized generation, electricity generation systems, you don't necessarily move to decentralized. So there is political choices in there. And I don't have an answer to this, but I have a lot of speakers after me. They may be able to give some of those. Infrastructure construction in Europe, finance is one part, but it's not the biggest acceptability. In some of the smaller countries, you have mentioned the countries I'm living, Belgium, it's virtually impossible to build a power line, and this is true for many other countries. Those you have been in Europe, you know how densely populated we are. And then financing instruments in terms of austerity. I think there are engineering tools which we could use, and there is quite a lot of innovation in these areas, the way I have explained it. Now, the final question, however, will be how does this all translate into jobs and growth? We had this interesting example in Germany recently. Germany was supporting a lot of solar, very high feed-in tariffs, and actually what it meant was that the Chinese producers were benefiting from this, which lowered the costs fantastically, which was excellent, but of course all the rents went to China, which is probably not what was the idea. So the relationship from technology support to jobs is not that straightforward, and I'm sure we will have a lot of discussion on this. My last slide here, just a few reminders. I think the clean, or we call it green, growth is for real, but it is far more complex that, with due respect to our politician here, that some of the politicians in Europe sometimes present it. It is a new way of industrial policy emerging, but it is really at an enormous scale, a scale we have not experienced before. You know, Apollo program was done within less than a decade, but here we talk about the Apollo for the whole economy, so this is something different. And then again, my last question, you know, what are the benefits from technology support for jobs and growth? Now, these are some comments, some questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing some, if not all, the answers to those. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is John Duffield. I'm a professor of political science at Georgia State University. And maybe if I can shamelessly make a plug for a book that Professor Vicki Birchfield at Georgia Tech and I have co-edited, which will be coming out in July on EU energy policy. So this is a particularly welcome opportunity to hear the views of a distinguished panel of experts from both sides of the Atlantic on related topics. Let me briefly introduce the panelists in the order in which they will speak. We've fortunately and quite unusually, they're physically in the same order that they'll speak, so that makes things a little bit simpler. But before I go on, let me thank Mr. Egenhofer for an excellent set of introductory remarks, which I think do a great job of framing the issues that we'll be considering in this symposium. We've asked each of the speakers to talk for 5 to 10 minutes, which should leave about 10 or 15 minutes for question and answer. We might, since it's such a large panel, we might take a break after the first two presentations for a few questions for those of you who are struggling to keep your hands down, especially after the keynote address. So speaking first will be Senator Doug Stoner, who's a state senator here in the state of Georgia. He's serving in his 4th term in the Senate and represents South Cobb County, just a hop, skip, and a jump from here. He's the chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus, but of particular relevance to this panel is his expertise on energy and transportation and mobility issues, especially since transportation accounts for about 30% of U.S. energy use. He serves currently on the Senate Transportation Committee and the Joint Senate-House Transportation Funding Study Committee, and previously chaired the Cobb County Chamber of Commerce Transportation Committee. To his left is Monsieur Thierry Boutin, who comes to us from the Embassy of France in Washington, D.C., where he has served since 2009. He's another expert on energy and transportation. He's currently the counselor and head of unit in the embassy on transport, environment, energy, sustainable development, and climate change. That's quite a portfolio. And he's currently the chairman of the Aviation Assembly, which brings together transport counselors from 35 countries around the world in Washington. Previously, he served as the transport counselor in the French permanent representation to the EU, and also has a lot of experience with Aéroports de Paris and the French Civil Aviation Authority. Immediately to his left is Mr. Frido Zielemann, who comes to us from the Embassy of Germany in Washington, where he also has been since 2009. He is the counselor there for environment, energy, and climate change, and previously headed the economic division at the German embassy in Mexico City, where he had responsibility for energy and environmental issues. And he's served a number of different posts around the world, including New York, Boston, Paraguay, Pakistan, and Berlin. And to his left, and at the opposite end of the table, is Jill Stuckey, who's an expert on renewable energy and alternative fuels. She is the director of the Georgia Center for Innovation for Energy within the Georgia Department of Economic Development. The mission of the center is to commercialize new products and services in the energy industry, and she previously was the director for alternative fuels at the Georgia Environmental Facilities Authority. So, Senator Stoner?
Again, I want to thank you for the invitation to come today. What I've asked to do, and I don't have a PowerPoint. Of course, I don't normally have one in the Senate either when I do presentations. I'm used to holding onto a podium, talking from the well, as we say, in the Georgia Senate. And to clarify, to make sure, I am a state senator, not a U.S. senator, even though some of my own constituents occasionally ask me how often do I get to Washington, because they see senator and they think you're in Washington, not here in Georgia. And the point is that what I'm going to talk on about today very quickly in a very broad overview is obviously U.S. policy, and then I'm going to bring it down to a more local level. And the question is, what's U.S. policy when it comes to, in the sense, clean energy, economic growth, climate change? Because all these are interrelated, as I think most of us who are here today know. And what is that policy? Well, we really don't have a policy. As was mentioned about it being a very complex issue, well, it is a very complex issue. And you do not have a consensus in this country on the issue of, in the sense of an energy policy that interrelates maybe with climate change. I mean, I think a lot of us who obviously are here in the United States understand that we have severe divisions on climate change and the fact of does it really exist or not exist. I recently, last year, took a trip to Germany. I think part of the reason I went, along with some of my fellow Americans, was to demonstrate to the German elected officials and policymakers that division, because we had that on the trip between different folks representing different parts of the country. We have no overarching, like I said, national strategy on energy policy. We don't necessarily have one on clean energy. We have different parts of the government pushing different things. You have an administration who obviously is extremely very friendly and is promoting clean technology, clean energy as a new industrial policy. Same time, we have a Congress, a divided Congress, depending on which House or the Senate you're in, and even within my own party, who is promoting kind of the old industries and protecting them in the sense of economic policies and subsidies. Very interestingly, obviously we don't have any consensus on climate change, but we actually may, I think as y'all are aware of, the Supreme Court decided that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency here, has the right under the Clean Air Act to regulate greenhouse gases. Now, it's going to be very interesting to watch. I can tell you with the divided Congress, there's going to be attempts to stop the ability of the EPA to do that. So in spite of the fact that we don't have a national strategy, there's going to be an attempt to regulate that. Now, there's another part of that a lot of people may not realize. Inadvertently, we're going to regulate greenhouse gases, particularly with our coal plants, because the EPA is about to institute new mercury regulations on coal plants, which about 40% of the coal plants in the United States will not be able to meet, economically speaking. So you're going to see a lot of coal plants closing down over that time period as these are implemented over the next decade. So due to mercury regulations, we may actually have an impact on climate change in the sense of it's not a true policy, but in the end, the same result, where our coal plants are going to be, a lot of the older coal plants are going to be shut down. So, I mean, to give you an example, so we have the EPA working on greenhouse gases, we have a Congress, part of it's wanting to defund it, you have parties who have different interests regionally, in the sense of their different regions. That has to do with the type of power structure in the sense of how power is supplied in those different regions. versus the Northwest versus New England versus the Midwest versus the South. And that affects, obviously, what goes on in Congress and in Washington. An example, I think y'all may be aware, in the Northwest, there is a regional pact along with California concerning climate change in the sense of setting goals. Similar pact in the Northeast, particularly New England. That does not exist in the Midwest, nor does in the South. And part of that reason is that in the Midwest and the South, a substantial amount of our power comes from coal, which is not the case particularly in the Northwest. A lot of it comes from hydro. California does have coal, but they also have a good bit of nuclear, and they also have pushed energy efficiency. So again, the point being you have regional differences, different regional approaches based on the type of infrastructure that's been in place, say, over the last 50, 60 to 100 years. You have different types of regulations when it comes to energy production. Should we go to centralized versus distributed? Some states are going that way, other states are not. So again, it's a hodgepodge, is the term I use, of thing. But, you know, before everybody gets, oh my God, we're not, you know, we don't have a clear national strategy. It's been that way generally in the United States on most national issues, is that you have this kind of, I hate to use the word competition, but these different competing interests on different issues over time. The challenge is who's going to win? And can, from a national standpoint, can we kind of, I hate to say, pick the winners and losers, or do we set a paradigm that allows fair competition? To bring it down on a more local level, let's talk about the state of Georgia. Now, we're here in the South. We get about, and Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking we're getting about, what is it, about 55% of our energy now from coal in Georgia? 60, yeah, I'm sorry, 60% of our energy comes from coal in this state. We get about 18 to 20% from nuclear, and then we also have natural gas. And we're in the process of potentially building another 2 nuclear reactors in this state. It'll be the first 2 new ones in the United States, obviously, since 3 Mile Island. That gives you a quick dichotomy of what we do in Georgia. We have a very centralized system. We have a large monopoly system. We do not have a deregulated electrical system. Now, to compare that to one of our fellow southern states, Texas, they deregulated electricity, and they've actually set goals of 25% renewable by the year 2020. So the point being is even in the South, per se, there's different approaches and opinions based on how the market conditions have been set up. Here in Georgia, I would say we are kind of just on the beginning part of that. Just in the last 5 years did we actually put out tax credits on the state level for renewable energy, which was just renewed this session, actually. In fact, we doubled the amount of tax credits that we're willing to give to businesses and to individuals for different types of renewable energy technology that they either apply on their home or apply on their business. Now, let me explain that when I say doubled, okay? What do I mean by doubled? Well, we started with $2.5 million a year for 5 years, and we doubled it now to $5 million a year for 5 years. So to try to put that in perspective, it sounds terrific, and it's a start, and it's been very successful in the sense that they've been used up very quickly. But again, it's really just a drop in the bucket. Now, we did pass a constitutional amendment this past year here in Georgia that has to do with the ability of creating energy efficiency contracts for state and local government. And what I mean by that is the ability to bring a private company in who will guarantee you the savings by coming into your buildings and, basically improving your energy use and dropping it, and you get a savings, and they'll basically guarantee you that savings. Well, unfortunately, under the Georgia Constitution previously, you weren't allowed to do that. Those contracts were not allowed under the Georgia Constitution. That changed this past year when luckily the voters of the state approved it. So it was explained to them that way as both a energy efficiency, something good for the environment, economic engine, and the voters did approve it. And in fact, they pretty much voted down every other constitutional amendment, if I remember correctly, Jill. So it was kind of encouraging that the voters in the state saw the benefits of that. Again, that's just a beginning for us here in Georgia. And, we've also, in the sense of issues that we still have to face, one of the issues we face in this state is we have, again, as I mentioned, a very centralized distribution system, a traditional electrical grid system. And we cannot do, currently in Georgia, there's a question if you can do power purchase agreements, if you're familiar with those. The ability of someone to come in and say, we'll put the capital in, we'll take the tax credit, federal or state, say we'll stick solar panels on the roof here at let's say at the local Target or Walmart or whatever, and you get an agreement with that company, say for 20 years, that they'll buy energy from you at a certain set kilowatt amount. Well, our major utilities are going around telling folks to cease and desist from doing that because it violates what we call the Georgia Territorial Act, which kind of defines which different utilities have which territories they actually sell electricity in. We've actually defined that in Georgia. We have some areas where they compete, other areas there is no competition. And now they're saying anyone that goes and puts something like that in with a purchase power agreement, well, you're a utility then, is what they're arguing, and you can't do that. Well, that's a discouragement, as you can imagine, to encourage clean technologies. So that's another issue we've got to deal with here in the future. So again, what I've done is I've done this quick arch for y'all to understand that, as was mentioned, it's a complex issue. It is divided in the sense by regions in this country who have different types of infrastructures, different types of regulations that affect energy production and how things are done. And even in certain regions, you have differences between states. An example, Georgia and Texas. We still use a very 20th, late 19th, very early 20th century model, as I would call it, versus where Texas, if you want to say, went to a 21st century model on deregulation with power. We did with natural gas. We just haven't decided to do it with power yet, and electricity in this state. So again, it goes back to the issue that we have a lot of different competitions going on around the state, a lot of different things. As a lot of you have heard, that's something about the United States, is that we let the states experiment. Well, that's definitely what we're doing with this issue, is we're letting the states experiment. And the question is, can we eventually come to a consensus in the market here in the sense of what's going to happen? And inadvertently, we may have to come to consensus anyway because of our own regulations for different reasons, be it mercury, be it greenhouse gases, through our Environmental Protection Agency. But I'm going to stop there, allow our other panelists, and be happy to look forward to take questions. And as a politician, as was mentioned several times before, I'm used to that, and I'm also used to telling you it's not easy. I don't have all the answers. And my wife tells me that a lot anyway, that I don't have all the answers on a lot of issues. But I look forward to any questions y'all have in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stoner. Thank you for keeping to the time, too.
Good afternoon, everyone. The good point is not to speak in first, is that some people have already said something I plan to say, so that gets faster. So thank you to Christian for introducing the European background, so I can concentrate on France. Just something he didn't mention was that we devoted much time during the French presidency of the European Union to have this energy climate package adopted, and we are very happy with that. On this question of green growth, first I will start with a confession. In the past, it may be that in France, our strong insistence on developing a robust nuclear program did overshadow a little bit other aspects of energy, including clean energy. Clearly, this is not the case since 2007, where it has been developed that there was no antagonism between the two, and we needed nuclear that still represent 80% of our electricity, and combined with clean energy. And I will give you two examples of that. The first is in 2 years, between 2008 and 2010, we multiplied by 7 the number of the solar part of electricity. And another example is the stimulus package that we did in front of the economic downturn, where 1/3 was devoted to green economy. How did we do that? Actually, we did build a very comprehensive green economic and political project that was called Grenelle de l'Environnement for those who know the name. But beyond that was the idea to have a consensus of where we wanted to go at the broad political level with all the actors, NGOs, politicians, administration, companies, and unions, to reach a consensus on that. We built behind that a robust legal framework, for instance, for renewable energies, which is to have 23% share of renewables in 2020. So what are our main policies on that? I won't bother you too much with biodiversity, agriculture, water pollution, but that's part of it. But the main tools we had were first on renewables. Our current priority is to develop wind onshore, about 1,000 megawatt a year, but as well offshore, because that was the question of acceptability as well that was raised before. So we plan a very strong offshore wind programs. And the other field is biomass, all the use of biomass, since we have a big sector there in France, and so we have strong targets there. We don't give up on solar, of course. It will remain important. We plan to have 5,000 megawatts by 2020, but those are the main things. The other big aspect of green growth is buildings. So first point is we'll have in 2012 a very strong target for new buildings. For its 50 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. To give you an idea, it's about 1/3 of the present standard, so it's a very big decrease there. And we'll have a standard in 2020 of neutral new buildings, so energy neutral new buildings. And last point is energy assessment. That is, every time you sell a house, you have to produce an energy assessment, and especially with barrel today and price of energy, about 85% of the buyers say that's a key factor of the way they are going to decide on buying or not buying a house. And the last main tool is on transportation and infrastructure. So infrastructure in the stimulus, we did focus much on first high-speed rail to complete our program, which is already robust, by building about 500 new miles of high-speed rail links. And as well, we are planning to build a canal. That's the first one since the 19th century. So it will be some 5.5 billion euros project, so a big project in terms of infrastructure. But as well, we tackled the individual cars, and we put in place in 2008 a very successful disincentives programs. So if you buy for an SUV, for instance, you will get some sort of minus $3,000 as a tax. And if you buy hybrid electric, you will get some sort of 3,000 bonus or $3,000 incentive from the state. And if you buy an electric car, it goes up to $7,000. It means that just in 2 years, we succeeded in reducing on the new fleet of cars bought the emissions by 15%, just in 2 years. So we're just, of course, according to the technological progress, and in order not to give too much incentive, but clearly that was a success. What's the result of that? There are plenty of definition of green growth and green economy, so it's very difficult to assess. We had a target of 600,000 jobs created by 2020, and about 200,000 by 2012. I would say that in the clean energy and renewables, we're a bit behind. We should reach 72, we should be around 18 to 100,000. But buildings did perform very much and very well, so many jobs were created there. And last point is on what I would say infrastructure and transport, and we're on track as well and on this in terms of jobs creation. So it's clearly not the end, and it's a continuous process, and we still have many things to do, many things to learn. But we have the feeling that it really helped the economy. It resisted well to the economic downturn. Those sectors did perform better than the average. And you have to keep as well in mind that it protects some competitiveness as well. For instance, for the automotive industry, we have roughly 150,000 jobs in France on automotive industry. And clearly, with on one side hybrid diesel, on the other side electric cars, this will clearly help competitiveness of the sector. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan. Just to break things up a little bit, I'll take 3 questions now before we resume the presentations, if there are any. Are there any questions? Yes, go ahead.
My name is Benoit Standard, Consul General of Belgium, and thankful to Vicky to have such a diverse panel, which will allow me to kill several birds with one stone. Very blunt question addressed to the representative of Georgia, of France, of Germany, and Europe. Do you consider nuclear energy as a clean energy? Yes or no? It's clean in a sense because it doesn't emit any CO2. It's problematic because of its waste. How do you consider it, and do you consider it as a valid model for the future? Thank you.
Let me gather 1 or 2 more. Yes, in the back?
Thanks very much. Diana Leva-Castros. I'm Associate Director of the European Union Center of Excellence. You have Dr. Vicky Birchfield and Ansley Hines. I'm also Managing Director of Market Access International here in Atlanta. I had a question for Mr. Engenhofer. Regarding your focus on the technology specifically, I noticed one of your points dealt with the EU's new policy to develop networks among SMEs to create new technologies and commercialize them. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more in detail regarding those programs. Thanks.
Is there a third question? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Chris Smith. I'm the Honorary Consul of Denmark, and I was just wondering if any of you had wave energy as part of your alternative fuel plans for the future.
Thank you for those questions. Why don't I let Mr. Engenhofer begin?
Yeah. Maybe on this last point about the SMEs, first of all, this 2020 strategy is a mission statement. It's going to work its way through, and now obviously there is a lot of work historically done on this, recognizing that in Europe most of the innovation comes from small and medium-sized enterprises. So that is the attempt to strengthen this. But again, there will be lots of national programs underpinning this, and there will be only one element of this will be the European Union. But I'm personally not working very much on this, so I'm not really be able to go into the detail. Now, on the nuclear question, I would just say the question was wrong. Now, I have a very simple view on this. I think the market will decide whether somebody takes the risk. A private investor, according to my view, will not invest into nuclear in a deregulated market. None of the investment banks will. There may be models where there is a state backup where this is happening, but these models will be very different in different countries.
I would say in some countries where there's full deregulation, there won't be new nuclear. So there will be very few new nuclear in Europe, is my assumption.
I've seen some other panelists will have thoughts on that issue.
Well, on the nuclear issue, obviously here in Georgia, we're in the process of potentially building 2 nuclear reactors in existing plant at Plant Vogel here. I agree actually with the statement that was just made, is that in a deregulated market, I doubt very much we would be looking at building nuclear plants, because the regulated system that we use here basically puts that cost on the ratepayers and not much on the shareholders. And so if you're a company, and we do a cost plus model here, which is very traditional, which is whatever the cost is, the monopoly regulated power company gets to add about a 10% cost on top of that for their return on investment. There is a limit to how the ratepayers and the elected officials will bear on such a thing, even if it is the law. Going back to the issue of is it clean or not, well, I think you kind of made the point, which is it's clean in the short term. It's definitely not clean in the long term. We just had a recent situation, some of y'all may be aware, we had these extreme tornadoes that came through northwest Georgia, which we don't normally get here regularly. And I know a question from the governor's office went recently to the Savannah River Nuclear Facility plant, which is a closed facility, has a lot of waste being stored there. And the question was put to it, if an F5 hit that facility, what would that do to the nuclear waste? So, we haven't even solved that issue, where to go bury the stuff. And we have it laying around the country. So it's a more serious issue than I think people realize. So again, it's clean in the short term, but not necessarily in the long term.
I always have a nuclear question when I talk about clean energy. Well, first of all, I would say that legally talking, when we refer to the 23% of clean energy standard in France, nuclear does not count into that figure. So we excluded nuclear from that figure, but that's the EU law anyway, so that's not new. Obviously, what we say is that it's a major contribution to our emissions, and that's why we have a low level of emissions in France compared to other countries. And the third point I would like to add is that it's obvious that France will remain highly dependent on nuclear in the future, and from our point of view, we will insist first on safety, increased safety. That's why we have stress test on our plants today. And the second point, what was raised on waste, is perfectly correct, and we work hard as well in R&D to improve, even though we recycle already 96% of our waste in France. But well, we still can improve in that field. Second question on wave energy. It's a very important point. Historically, we had one real wave energy plant in France, in Brittany, and in our offshore program, I alluded to wave energy is clearly part of the strategy.
I also always get this question, especially when I sit next to a French. And then the discussion always turns into a discussion on nuclear energy. So for Germany, the consideration regarding nuclear energy are relatively clear. Presently we have a government that is a Christian democratic, free democratic, it's a center-right government, and this government has confirmed basically the decision of the previous governments to phase out nuclear energy. It had just extended the lifespan of nuclear power plants, but it had clearly stated in the government agreement, in the agreement between the parties, that there will be no nuclear power plants, and that the nuclear power was supposed to serve as a bridging technology until we have enough nuclear to take over, until we have enough renewables and other energy forms to take over baseload functions. Now, after the event in Fukushima, the accident in Fukushima, and also I would say, after certain election results we had in Germany, which saw a great increase for the Green Party as a consequence of that. The government has started to put into question that previous decision to extend the lifespan of nuclear power plants, and I think we might end up phasing out earlier. Presently, the discussion is something around 2020, 2022, so within the next 10 to 11 years, but that is still under consideration. But definitely no new nuclear power plants in Germany, and definitely we're on our way out. The question is just how fast we're going out. Thank you. Oh, sorry, just one more remark on the wave energy. There is some R&D into wave energy, but as far as I know, there is no wave energy actually being used in Germany. However, the way the system works, the way the support system for renewable energies works, is that if you had a system that you could present, then there would be a chance to also then feed that energy into the grid and make use of the present system. But I don't know of any large installations of wave energy as of now.
Nuclear is cleaner than coal. So nice short answer on that. Wave technology. Our power companies have looked at it. We have some problems along the Georgia coast. We have sea turtles, we have migrating whales and so forth. So we haven't gotten too far down that path, and we don't have a lot of waves here, but we are certainly open to looking at technologies on that.
Okay, thank you. Well, there'll be another opportunity for questions, but I'd like to resume the panel presentations with Mr. Zieleman.
So the good thing is I have the nuclear out of the way. I'll just take my time here. First of all, I have to tell you one thing, and now he's going away. In Germany, we have a saying, you always meet twice in your life, meaning be nice to the person the first time you meet him. Now here's someone I meet for the third time today, because the Consul General of Belgium, he was a colleague of mine in Pakistan. We have been together in Pakistan for several years. We have actually been to the city that is now so famous, even though a certain compound was not there when we were there like 15 years ago. The second time around, I met him in New York, where we were both posted, and this is now the third time that we meet, even though he's in Atlanta and I'm in Washington. So I'm very glad to see Benoit again, and I'm looking forward to having a beer later and talk about old times. We have heard a bit about the European framework, and Senator Stoner said that in the United States, the different states all have their different policy, and everybody does something, and it's not so different in the European Union. I mean, the EU has a certain framework, and one big framework that we have is the European emissions trading system, which is one very important means to reduce our emissions. But apart from that, we have our goals that we want to reach, and the burden of how to reach that is shared. But how to reach this within every country, we are free to do that. And so Europe is in a way a bit of a laboratory. Everybody has its own approaches. And so I'm presenting some aspects of the German approach that we have. And I think it's worth looking at it, especially also from here, because, I mean, we're obviously much smaller than the United States, but there's a lot of similarities. Germany has a strong manufacturing base, a lot of heavy industry, car industry, a lot of machine building companies. We used to have, or still have, a high amount of coal in our energy mix. We have nuclear still in our energy mix. So there's a lot of similarities, and there's two main measures, main points I want to make. The one thing is that in a country like that, in Germany, we were able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions significantly by over 25% since 1990, without suffering economic downturns or something like that. We have had a constant economic growth over the last years, and we have had a constant reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions. And just to give you an idea, if I say 25% under 1990 levels, if you look at California, which has an ambitious program here, they first want to get back to that level within the next years before even talking about further reductions. So that gives you an idea of how low emissions are. Actually, our emissions presently are somewhere on the level that we had in the 70s. And the other thing is, while we were able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that considerably, we have been able to create, until now, 370,000 jobs only in the field of renewable energies. And well, just to give you an idea also, last year we had the year with the highest investment in renewable energies, and nonetheless we still had a strong economic growth last year. We were the country that came out really strong out of the worldwide recession. The question is, how did we get there? What were the measures we took to get there? So I mentioned the European emissions trading system, which is basically a way, as he put it, to internalize external costs, because somehow it puts a price on carbon, whether you do this via a carbon tax or via the cap that you put on emissions, and then you start trading. My focus, of course, is not the EU, it's the national policy. And one further remark ahead of it is there's a very big difference between Germany and the United States in one point, and that is, in Germany, all political parties have accepted that what the scientists tell us about climate change has to be taken seriously. There is no discussion on whether there is a climate change, and there is no discussion on whether or not this is a serious problem that has to be taken care of. That is a discussion we have put behind us. We are discussing how to deal with it. And when you discuss how to deal with it, there's a lot of differences that can come up between liberals and conservatives and greens and left and right. There's a lot of things to discuss, but not the question whether or not we have to do something. Now, getting back to the question, I said, how did we get there? I think and I want to focus on one decisive measure, and that would be the Renewable Energy Act in Germany, or known here as the feed-in tariff law. That's a law that was actually passed unanimously in German parliament, and it's a law that the lawmakers take a lot of pride in, because they say this was a law that they did without the big support from administration or from experts. It's a law that they did, and that's why the law, as they say, I spoke longer to one of the lawmakers who was involved, and he said that's why the law is so short and easily understandable. And it has just a few basic principles. First of all, it says utilities have to buy renewable energy. Then it says the utilities have to give renewable energy priority. That means they cannot say, oh, I'm sorry, today all my nuclear power plants are running at full power and I don't need your energy. If you offer solar energy, wind energy, biogas, anything, they have to buy it. And then, maybe the most important one, the producers of renewable energy are paid a guaranteed price. A guaranteed price that is dependent on the technology you use. If you use solar energy, you get a higher price. If you use wind, because it's cheaper, a little bit lower price. But there's a price on every technology, and this price automatically decreases every year, so the initial price, taking into consideration the decrease of the costs through mass production, for instance. But once you get one price, you get that price for the next 20 years. And that is something that any producer of renewable energy really needed, because it's an enormous price certainty. You really knew what was coming your way. You could calculate easily and clearly, and you knew if I invest in solar panels, this is how much it costs me. I know how many hours sunlight per year I have, and I can calculate my costs, I can calculate my income, and I know within 20 years I'll get that back. Oops. Finally, maybe also a very important point is that the extra costs that the utilities pay, because they pay for someone who produces solar energy more than they would pay if they bought the energy or the electricity at the electricity exchange. This price difference that comes up is then evenly distributed among the consumers. That means it never goes into the federal budget or into any budget. So if we have a difficult budget situation, which is not too uncommon these days in many countries, it doesn't matter because the money never goes into the budget. The money is paid to the consumers, and then the extra cost that the utilities pay is then distributed among the consumers again. Now, this has triggered an enormous investment in renewable energies. This has triggered an enormous investment in wind energies in the past, even though that went a bit down the previous years. And it has especially triggered an enormous investment in solar energy. And as Christian pointed out, it has even led to too much support for solar energy, because one thing that happened was that, especially last year, the prices had gone down so much that all of a sudden you could get a guaranteed return on your investment in solar panels that was above 10%. And that was not the intention of the law. So it had to be fixed. But especially last year, we had an enormous new installation of PV above 8,000 megawatts. That is my reminder that I should come to an end soon. Now, I'm just focusing on the outlook. This is the main measure that we have taken as far as political framework is concerned. Now, the outlook, and this is the energy concept that the government has presented recently, is that we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% until 2020, and will, within the framework also of the EU, of course, work on those goals as far as energy efficiency is concerned and as far as the increase of renewable energy as a whole is concerned. But we plan to go beyond that, what we would have to do anyways within the European framework. And our goal is to go to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by minus 85% by 2050. And the government put up an energy blueprint for this last year. And I found this very remarkable because you can talk a lot about how to reach the 2 degrees goal that has been agreed upon in Copenhagen, for instance. But this was really a presentation of how to get there, how to do this. And since time is running out, I will just focus on 2 or 3 points. Of course, we will further expand the renewable energies, especially right now the offshore wind energy, because offshore wind energy has come a bit to a halt. Now we're pushing this very strongly, and we expect a lot of big wind parks to go online within the next years. The next thing is a dramatic increase in building efficiency. Thierry has already pointed to that one, which is the main point if you want to increase your energy efficiency. We will have dramatic changes in the mobility sector, the same as here, where we think the solution is electric mobility, and the plan of the government is to have 1 million electric cars on the road by 2020. That's a lot, but everyone I talk to, especially from the car industry, they think this is possible. So let's stay optimistic there. And the most important, though, and that is one point I've seen before in one of the presentations I've heard before, is we have to keep this transparent, and the people have to stay involved, because there will be a lot of decisions taken in the future, a lot of decisions that are difficult. We have to build new power lines, and nobody likes power lines. We have this. We have the NIMBY phenomenon. Somebody pointed out there's in Germany maybe even a stronger one. It's here called it bananas. Build anything, but not anywhere, and maybe not at all. And especially no power lines. Maybe even people don't want new wind turbines, because we have a lot of them in the landscape. So there will be a lot of discussions, and we will see a lot of discussions of, I would say, green versus green, conservationists. I mean, when it goes to bird protection, or the other week we had a visitor, a politician from Germany, and he was exchanging views on also exactly this issue. And he said, well, in Brandenburg, where he comes from, they have to count the bats now, because the bats might risk flying against the wind turbines. And then the Americans said, well, yes, we are trying to install a big solar plant in the desert, and now we have to count the turtles in the desert. So these are issues that are coming up, and the most important thing is to keep the people involved, because there's no doubt in my mind that we have to go forward towards this energy revolution. But we have to take the people along, and we always have to argue why we do this, and we must never forget that we also do this to fight climate change, which is sometimes forgotten here. This is not only about green jobs, and it's not only about who has the best new technology, it's also about preventing or mitigating climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gulen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have a PowerPoint. Jesse, if you could load that up for me. And I am Jill Stuckey, again with the Center of Innovation for Energy, and I'm going to be speaking today primarily on biomass to energy. And my colleague in the next session, Kosta Simiglo, will be talking about the other things that the Center of Innovation does. The Center of Innovations were created by former Governor Perdue, and he created 6 areas in Centers of Innovation where he wanted to concentrate. So we have manufacturing, energy, life science, aerospace, logistics, and agriculture. We work very closely with the other centers. The Agriculture Center raises all the biomass that I find projects to turn into energy. Life science is also working with the pharmaceuticals and other companies to help along these lines. Aerospace, we're very active in trying to convert biomass into liquid fuels, and especially jet fuel. So it's very nice. I get to work very closely with all our centers. But our goal at our mission at the Center of Innovation for Energy is to commercialize new energy-related products and services. So how do we go about that? Well, there's lots of things that are driving us right now. First, we have the economy. In the biomass area, our forestry industry has 25% unemployment in our logging and the infrastructure areas. So we're very much concerned on trying to correct that or remedy that situation. And I spend a lot of time in Europe, especially the EU, chasing mandates that some of our other panelists have already spoken about, especially countries that have biomass to energy specific mandates, such as Sweden, that has a 30% renewable portfolio standard for biomass to energy. So we're helping them. You know, if things come around, some of you older gentlemen may have a leisure suit in your closet or two. You know, they say if you hold on to these things, they come around. Well, back 400 years ago, the Indians, Native Americans in Georgia, traded beads. And now we're doing the same thing. I'm in Europe selling wooden beads to the Europeans who use those wooden beads to make electricity from biomass. So hold on to those leisure suits. They may come back around. Energy security. You know, back in the 70s, few of those folks that have leisure suits might remember the 70s. There was a shortage of fuel in this country. We were down by 5% in the incoming crude oil into this country, and it crippled us. Prices spikes, long line at the gasoline station. Well, today with the things that are going on in the Middle East, you know, tomorrow or 2 weeks from now, we could be down by 15%, and that would very much cripple us. So that's another thing that's driving the biomass to energy. We're looking for technologies that can take biomass and cost effectively, without mandates, make liquid fuels, make gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel. So that's another thing that's driving it. And last, but certainly not least, the environment. These are cleaner technologies. So we're trying to help the environment and help our economy. So how do we do that? We came up with the idea to start what we call a one-stop shop. And a lot of the other states around us throw money at companies to get them to locate in their state. Well, our government hasn't chosen to do that, so we had to find other ways. So we initiate good old Southern hospitality here. So we gather everybody in one room at one time that you're going to need to deal with if you're going to start a company in the state of Georgia or bring jobs to the state of Georgia. So we're a forum for new and expanding businesses. We're a venue to explain state and federal policies and procedures, which can be very complicated if you're coming over from the European Union, it's very confusing to get through all of our red tape and know what to do, and it takes a lot of time. So we gather all of these people in one room at one time. We think that we help you get the shovel in the ground anywhere from 6 months to a year sooner. We introduce you to the regulatory officials. And what we do is we hold meetings once a month. We give everybody an hour of our time. The first 10 or 15 minutes, they explain what they want to do. So they have a technology that is a torrefaction technology that turns biomass into coal. So we go around the room and tell them, okay, this is what you need to do, this is who you need to talk to, this is the regulatory issues that you're going to have to deal with. We give them a nice jump drive with about 750 pages of information, great weekend reading for them, and they have all the answers at their fingertips. But if they don't find that those people are helpful, I keep a big baseball bat under my desk, and I'll go help them with the people that they need help with. So far we've had over $2 billion worth of announcements from that project, from our one-stop shop. We've been running it now about 3 years, and it's been very successful. So what are we good at in the state of Georgia? Well, we're very good at solar. We have a lot better sun than our European friends, especially Germany and other countries that are world leaders. But what our specialty is, and what I've been focusing on, is biomass. We have more trees than any other state in the nation, except Oregon. And Oregon is old growth, redwood trees. We're not going to cut a redwood tree down and make a kilowatt of electricity or a gallon of fuel out of it. But in Georgia, we specifically grow trees. We put them in rows, just like Iowa grows corn. We grow trees, and we've been doing it for a long time. I like to say it's not our first rodeo. We've been supplying trees for our pulp and paper industry and the lumber industry for decades. And both of those industries are down right now. Our housing starts are down by 92% in the state of Georgia. So we're looking for ways to utilize these trees because they're growing 38% faster than we are using them. So it's very timely what we have going on. And when I'm in Europe, they're very concerned about, is this renewable? And I say, well, we have 1,200 million tons of trees on the stump today in Georgia. And when a company, the German utility RWE, announced the world's largest pellet facility in South Georgia, they said, you know, what is this going to do? Well, PowerPoint wouldn't let me draw the line small enough to show the impact of the 1.5 million tons that facility is going to use per year, so we can handle this. But that doesn't mean that we're going to rest on our laurels. We want to be the world's leader 10, 20, 30 years from now. So we're looking at fast-growing crops such as miscanthus. Our pine trees on average grow 5 tons per acre per year. Miscanthus can grow up 2 or 3 times that amount. You don't have to water it. You don't have to put a lot of fertilizer on it. You don't have to put a lot of pesticides on it. It is an invasive species, and one of the questions I always get at these talks is, why can't you use kudzu? Well, kudzu has too much moisture and a lot of other issues, but we don't want this to turn into a kudzu type issue. So this is a non-seeded variety that we're working on, and there's been great results. Hopefully next year in the state of Georgia, we have about 1,000 acres of miscanthus. This year we'll have enough rhizomes or pieces of roots to plant over 10, 20,000 acres of this in Georgia. The problem is it costs about 9 cents a kilowatt to convert biomass into electricity if you go the usual sources. You can find some waste sources that are cheaper. And the power companies may pay you 6, 7 cents for that. So we've got a bit of a gap right now. So we'll see how many of these projects will go forward in the future. And here's our wooden beads. We have 4 pellet facilities that are operational in the state of Georgia today. We have 5 others announced that will use over 3,000 green tons of biomass per year. We have a biofuels industry today that has been struggling. Range Fuels is the first commercial cellulosic ethanol factory that made its first batch of fuel and closed down. temporarily. They're working on some ways to get back operational, but it's been a tough go for the ethanol industry. And that's one reason we're looking very forwardly to find ways that can take the biomass and make drop-in fuels, that can make the gasolines, diesels, jet fuels. Back to the European mandates, I met with Delta Airlines last week. Come 2012, every airline from here that flies into the EU will be taxed. So they're very much looking to go green, and we're trying to help them. My vision for the future is that we produce the 1 billion gallons of jet fuel that Hartsfield needs every year in rural Georgia from our biomass. So we have about 6 different technologies now that currently can take biomass and make jet fuel. And what we're trying to do is do pilot projects, try to commercialize those so we can compete with a $80, $90 barrel of crude is where most of the technologies we're looking at are trying to locate. Just to recap, the pellet production is big. I think we'll be shipping pellets to Europe probably for the next 5 or 10 years. And after that, I think they're going to come up with other ways to meet their energy goals. And I think by then we'll be producing liquid fuels, pharmaceuticals, and other products from our biomass and utilize it ourselves here. So, University of Georgia, you know, we're starting to look at things differently now. University of Georgia, they've been working on the perfect sweet potato. It fits on your plate nice. It has a really nice texture and skin. Well, now they're working on a 17-pound, just ugly as sin sweet potato, but it can make fuel. Same thing here at Georgia Tech. They've been working for decades for the pulp and paper industry, looking to make that perfect piece of paper. Now they're looking at how we can make BTUs. So it's an exciting future. Georgia is basically winning against all the other states with announced bioenergy projects. We have well over 30 projects. The closest state to us is California that has 21 announced projects. So we feel really good about those numbers. We really don't have any mandates here, but we have the biomass, and everybody's beginning to notice us. So let's talk about Iowa. In 2002, Iowa was producing about 25 million gallons of ethanol. Today, they're producing 3.6 billion gallons of fuel. Guess what Georgia's going to look like in the next 5 or 10 years? Each of those circles are going to represent a facility that will make fuel, hopefully gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel, and that will change the economy in rural Georgia. So we're very excited about the future, looking for these technologies to come to the state, and I'm hoping that within 20 years, the 8 billion gallons of fuel that we use in Georgia, we can grow right here in Georgia. Thank you very much.
I'm just looking for a thumbs up or down to go ahead with some more questions. Okay, we're running a little long, but we have time for just a few more questions. Yes, sir?
Hi, I'm Brian Grant. I'm a commercial real estate broker, a master's in technology graduate of Georgia Tech. I got my master's degree here in hopes of doing an entrepreneurial venture with alternative energy. In commercial real estate, I have an easy database to access hundreds of thousands, it's not on, hundreds of millions of square feet of roof space that's flat, unshaded, and owned by one easy-to-find person that has access to capital. Instead of dealing with rooftops of houses with trees and spouses that don't want it, neighborhood association rules. I mean, I could pave the road in Georgia with solar energy if the thing that the senator here brought up wasn't in existence, and we had a longer than 5-year renewable contract with Georgia Power. So the chokehold that we face in the state is at the Public Service Commission's office, and if they could get Georgia Power Southern Company to give us 10-year renewable contracts for feed-in tariff systems. So what is being done, Senator, to get the Public Service Commission to open the floodgates up for this type of development? I figured out by the way, legal way around the entity problem that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. There's a way around that, and it's okay, but we still can't make it pay for itself.
I have a feeling that's for me.
Could I go ahead and just collect one or two more?
Yeah, go ahead, that's fine. Yeah.
Any other questions? Over here.
Another question for you, Senator.
Your lucky day.
My lucky day.
Hi, I'm Jay Sims, a recent graduate from Georgia Tech as well, with my own solar panel venture. So similar kind of thing. I just wanted you to talk about the resistance you run into being Democrat versus Republican, specifically in Georgia, due to Georgia Solar, and how much resistance you experience due to the fact, just because of political parties, that it's a green liberal issue or something like that.
Is there perhaps one more question? Yes, sir.
What seems to be emerging is some political questions here. And so my question is, can we afford to let the politicians railroad us down the road after they've set all our jobs overseas? And the gentleman from Germany was very, very succinct in the fact that we all need to stay involved or we're going to wind up in trouble.
Go ahead, Senator.
I think they're all for me. Any of my colleagues can join anytime. No, concerning the PPAs, actually, just the point you're making concerning, I believe, specifically Georgia Power, is misinterpreting the 1973 Georgia Territorial Act. And there is a group, by the way, of bipartisan senators who are interested in looking at that issue in the coming session, to clarify, quote unquote, the vagueness, because this was a piece of legislation that was written in 1973, with no concept of what we're talking about today. And so it's vague when it comes to this issue of defining a power producer in the sense of talking about what we're talking about in the sense of putting solar panels or even, say, a fuel cell as distributive energy. So I think, and going back to the PSC, to be very honest with you, I think we have an elected board. I would say that I think as time goes on, I hope sooner that folks get engaged and understand. Most folks don't even know what the PSC is and don't realize what it does. And unfortunately, this is a political statement on my part. In my view, the PSC is basically there as a lapdog for the industry. And I'm being very honest. And now that can change. I think we have a new gentleman on board, Tim Eccles, who's a Republican, but is actually very, very interested in renewable energy. And I can tell you that the folks at Georgia Power aren't real thrilled with him, just to be honest. I'm being very frank here. Going on to the other issue about partisanship, actually, no, the tax credit that we're referring to was actually a bipartisan effort of both, at least in the Senate, of Republicans and Democrats. In fact, the majority leader of the Senate, Chip Rogers, and I have worked together on this issue over the years, including the President Pro Tem. So now we don't get into the debate about climate change, okay? Because that's a non-starter. But when it comes to do we create jobs and do we create a new industry, that's definitely a starter. And so on that end, that's the discussion we have in the General Assembly, is how do we create jobs. And I think Jill was kind of indicating, obviously a lot of interest from a lot of our elected officials, particularly, there's a lot of elected officials from Middle and South Georgia who have a lot of forest and cropland that they represent in a sense. So there's a bipartisan effort there. And then I think, going to your statement, I think I kind of answered it in the sense that the folks are going to have to get involved, and they're going to have to step up. And there's folks in the legislature, too, who are pushing on that issue. But I don't think people realize that the Public Service Commission actually has as much power as it does, which it really does. And I think that could change. You have some good candidates run for it, going out there talking to folks about how they can create new industries as part of what we do in our regulations, I think can have a major impact.
Would anybody else like to comment?
Anybody else want to join on that?
Well,
I don't understand.
A European perspective on Georgia politics? Well,
Sir, do you have a template of what you've enacted in Germany that we could share to work with the PSC here in Georgia? Because the way that you charge for energy and pass it on to consumers is a framework that would sell here politically in the state. With the Republican politics that we do have, they want an ROI on
be happy to share that. We have it. Yeah. On the other hand, if I may just, it's a comment that it's a bit, I don't know, blunt maybe, but sometimes the way you're supporting nuclear energy here in Georgia reminds me a bit of the feed-in tariff system, actually, because it's the same thing you do. You have a power purchase agreement, and the consumers pay ahead a certain amount of money, a bit more, in order to make this investment possible. I mean, with that kind of policy, you might as well enact that and support all sorts of renewable energies. However, I think there's a clear decision to go nuclear here. And that's, of course, the decision that Georgia has to take and no one else.
Well, I'd like to thank our keynote speaker and our panelists. And we'll be taking a short break now. If you have questions, you'll have a chance to corner them now. And then please come back in about 10 minutes for our second panel. Thank you.
We began this morning with a wonderful panel with our local European Consular Corps. And we had a nice lunch with the Secretary General of NATO, and we're very thrilled to continue our symposium this afternoon and to follow the earlier panel, which focused more on policy frameworks. You've learned that the United States doesn't really have a policy, according to Senator Stoner, and that the Europeans, according to Christian Eigenhofer, has much more of a policy or a narrative and mission at this point. So this afternoon, we're going to conclude with a focus on what the private sector is doing to lead in the development of clean and green technologies to promote growth and sustainable economic growth. So we're very pleased to have you all join us this afternoon. And what I would like to do is introduce the panelists in the order that they're going to speak, which is not the same as you see on the PowerPoint screen behind you. And then I will have each panelist come forward for their talk. We'll have 2 speakers and then follow that with a Q&A. So the first speaker I want to introduce to the far left is, to your far right, is Dr. Peter Evans. Peter Evans is the Director of Global Strategy and Planning for GE Energy. He is a prolific author, has published widely on energy issues and energy and trade. He holds a PhD from what we like to say around here, the Georgia Tech of the Northeast, MIT. So we thank him for being with us this morning. Look forward to your talk, Peter. Following Peter Evans, we have Mr. Joe Thomas of MAGA Solar. And he is the president and chief operating officer of the North American headquarters of MAGA Solar. And following Joe Thomas, we have Mr. Kostas Simoglu, who is with the Georgia Department of Economic Development, partner with Jill Stuckey, who you heard from earlier at the Center for Innovation. Jill focuses on bioenergy, and Mr. Simoglu is in charge of energy technology there. And then we will conclude with our 4th speaker, Mr. Thomas Orbeger of Siemens Industry. He is the business manager for hybrid drives in the United States, and he has a lot of fun exhibits that, and a special surprise, I think, to announce. So he will conclude the panel. So without further ado, we'll get started, and I invite Peter Evans to come to the podium.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. And it's also fantastic to give a presentation where I don't have to jump on an airplane to actually go. I live here in Atlanta, if you can believe that. GE headquarters is actually located here, GE Energy's headquarters. We're a pretty large enterprise. It's about a $40 billion business. We have close to 90,000 employees around the world. And we have a technology portfolio that spans pretty much the gambit of energy technologies, ranging from gas turbines, wind turbines, solar, small gas engines, smart grid technology, you name it, sensing and control. And we're growing quite rapidly. Just in the last 6 months, we've made 6 acquisitions for $11 billion. So there's a lot of things happening in the world, and Georgia is an important footprint for GE Energy. We have, for the enterprise as a whole, over 5,500 employees here in Georgia. But Germany is also an important footprint for GE. We have 7,000 people in Germany. In Germany, outside of Munich, is one of our global research centers. Our headquarters for our renewables business for GE Energy is located in Germany as well. And we learn a lot from being in that marketplace because as we heard from the previous panel, there's a lot happening in the renewables and clean energy space in Europe. They're at the forefront on the policy in many policy areas. And as a result, policy drives technology and deployment. And so by being in that market and participating in that market, we're able to learn things that we can then bring back to the United States and other markets. So having that ability to be in Europe as well as compete here is, I think, an important dynamic. What I'd like to do is just highlight 3 issues. One is to think broadly about what is clean energy. Second is the importance of scale in this industry. If you want to have an impact, you really have to be able to set up and create the conditions for the industry to build scale. And then finally, I want to highlight something about how the U.S. and Germany and Europe writ large may work more closely together to cooperate in an important area that I would like to highlight. So first, this issue of what is clean. We've been discussing so far today really a narrow, what I would consider a fairly narrow band of technologies that can deliver this goal of achieving cleaner technology, that is particularly wind and solar. But there's a whole gambit of technologies out there that are playing a contributing role. And one area in particular that I think is important is to think about how digital technologies are now beginning to infuse the energy space in a new way. We've gone through what I call the first wave of the digital revolution, and that is with the initial creation of the internet and our laptops that we all use and things. And we're really going into a second wave of the digital revolution, and we're going to see these digital technologies penetrate the energy sector in much more profound ways going forward. And I think it's very exciting. We hear a lot about it in terms of the smart grid, but there's many other applications. And the general public doesn't really see this very much because it's typically in B2B applications. So these are sales, and basically GE Energy isn't really a household name. GE's famous for its appliances and things because that touches the customer, but huge amounts of energy are used in the industrial parts of the economy and to the utility sector that doesn't hit the consumer directly, but it's sort of behind the scenes. And there's just tremendous ways of using digital technologies to enhance the performance of those assets and reduce their energy mix. And I'll just give you one example. GE has 1,000 gas turbines in our fleet that's out there in the marketplace right now. So these are operating units. There's just tremendous opportunities to mine the data off of those machines and better help customers that only have a few units improve the performance of those units. And so that's using and leveraging digital technology on the service side of the business to enhance performance. And where we hear a lot about the need to increase wind and solar and things of that nature, what's important to recognize is just increasing the percentage of gas turbines by 1% can supplement or be equivalent in terms of reducing CO2 to thousands of wind turbines deployed. So and the reason is that these are huge fleets of machines and they consume tremendous amount of fuel, but they also produce a tremendous amount of energy on the back end. So the digital space is one that we're very excited about, and I think we're going to see really some very interesting things happening over the next decade in this space. So when we think of clean, think more broadly than just the wind and solar, and how it actually can also improve the deployment in the clean energy space. So for example, we've just developed and are rolling out into the marketplace new software technology around wind turbines. We can enhance the performance of those wind turbines, not by changing the physical size of the wind turbines, but just by improving the power electronics associated with those. So when we think in politicians and policymakers think about the promoting clean energy, really think broadly about what is the policy parameters of doing so, and how to leverage some of these other technologies to make that happen. Again, this issue of scale is very important. Right now, on a global basis, there are about 5,000 gigawatts of electricity installed base in the world. 5% of that is renewables, excluding hydro. So you can see that on a global basis, the amount of renewables penetration is still quite small. So there's tremendous opportunity to expand that. But to be able to do that, you really need scale enterprises. I think the day of the small enterprise and the small wind farm, in fact, that's how my family got into the energy business. It was back in 1980 when President Carter, here based in Georgia, when he became president, and the energy shocks at that time, he introduced a piece of legislation that incentivized private entrepreneurs to produce power in the United States by changing the dynamic between independents and the utility company. And so my family got into that at the early stages. So it's been about 30 years since I've been in this clean and energy space and around deregulation and private power. Back in those days, they were pretty small operations, and you can only make so much of an impact. Today, if we really are looking to transform energy systems, you really have to have scale, and that requires companies the size of GE and Siemens and others to be able to go forth and really deploy the technologies. That's how you make a dent in the system. And so that what's interesting is that 2002 is when GE got into the wind turbine business, and at that time there weren't very big players in the space. We were able to bring our scale into the wind business and actually produce turbines that had longer lives, better performance, and increased efficiency, and a much lower cost. So we've been able to drive down the cost of the technology over the last decade quite substantially. And in the process, we've deployed so far 17,000 wind turbines, which is equivalent about 27 gigawatts or about 6 million homes. So it's an example of when a big firm is able to come into a marketplace, take a technology, and really build it to a global basis. And we have a global supply chain. So we source products and we sell it all over the world. And I think that states in particular, benefit from that. So Georgia benefits, even though we don't have a manufacturing facility. A lot of the people that are involved in managing that are based here in Atlanta and in the Georgia area. So finally, the other area that I was thinking about in terms of cooperation between the U.S. and Germany is really around this issue of industrial policy. It was mentioned a number of times, and the key thing that I'd like to point out is that on one hand, you need governments to help support these industries for the very reasons that were highlighted, in that there's certain risk profiles where on the front end you need to incentivize the industry. But the challenge is that sometimes governments over engage in an industry and protect certain players in an industry. And I think that over the last 30 years, the United States and Europe have worked to create a trade regime that allows for cross-investment and cross-trade between our countries. And this system works reasonably well. But the fact of the matter is the United States and Europe are really not the only markets for clean energy. And in fact, recently we've fallen behind in terms of what are the largest markets. And those larger markets now are clearly in Asia. China now is the largest wind market in the world. But some of those protections and the landscape in which you compete with as a firm don't necessarily apply in some of these other regions. And so when we speak of industrial policy, we clearly want to demarcate industrial policy that helps benefit the industry, but not those kinds of policies that are designed to protect certain firms or particular national champions in a particular region. And so I'd make an appeal that if we're looking for further future cooperation between the United States and Europe, one area would be to expand the framework that we have developed jointly to make sure that it covers the world so that fair competition can be achieved globally and that the entire industry can achieve these types of scale that I've been mentioning, because if we're really going to drive cleaner energy around the world, you need firms that are able to compete on a level playing field and to be able to compete head to head. And I think that's a way that you can help to accelerate the deployment of these technologies and a way that we can help boost regional economies and for each part of the world to contribute their comparative advantage in doing that. So with that, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. And I'm going to show you a presentation and cover a little bit about Maguey Solar and about solar photovoltaics. And if I can hit this pointer and get us going. Okay. And while I'm waiting on that to start, you know, one of our speakers in our earlier panel, Mr. Seelman from Germany, made a comment. He said, we're on the energy revolution and we need to take the people along with us. Well, today we're a Georgia-based company, Maguey Solar USA, who is has a German parent, and we're basically here in Georgia to help enable you to do exactly what he said. And when we go through that, especially in the solar photovoltaic arena, we'll go through that and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, first of all, Maguey is come from our parent, and Manfred Gearing was the gentleman that started Maguey Solar many, many years ago, and it's now the Maguey Group. And that was started in Germany over 35 years ago, and now has grown into a multifaceted organization that is over in 31 companies in 16 countries, and a very large enterprise that covers the whole area of prefabricated roofing technology as well as solar and solar thermal. Our products and what we do is we actually sell the whole solar photovoltaic systems, everything from the panel technology to partnerships with inverter technologies down into the whole bundles of the systems. We are German engineered and produce product, and we'll be producing product here in Georgia as we came to Georgia last year in 2010 and set up our headquarters in Dublin, Georgia. It's a technology, as we heard a little bit from the earlier panelists that were talking about some of the policies and some of the technologies, that is very safe, it's very efficient, it's clean, it's zero emissions, it helps improve your carbon footprint, and it's basically unlimited tap as far as the use of the sun. The other thing about it is very interesting when you look at this solar radiation grid that I like to compare it to. If you look at this, Germany, which is the world leader in this activity and leads it by far, and you look at their solar radiation grid, and of course the brighter the color the better, you'll see that it's comparison to pretty much Alaska in the United States, where you saw earlier in Jill's presentation where she circled Georgia as one of the areas in the southeast that really is from a solar radiation grid. There's just no bad place in the United States. And so when we looked at a market to come to and expand our business, when you look at the United States, it's a tremendous market and a tremendous field to be able to get into that can really benefit the people of the U.S. and the whole solar industry. Now, when you talk about job growth, and we heard that a little bit, and we had the senator up, and there was a lot of questions about some of the things that go on. As far as job growth and ability from a market, and you talked about scale a few minutes ago, the gentleman from GE, when you look at the scale in an industry that's really growing, since 2007, this industry has pretty much been doubling itself in the United States, even though the United States, from an overall usage standpoint, is very, very minimal when you look across the whole world. And I think as the panelists were talking about that in some of the different countries that were here speaking, that was some of the things we're trying to learn as the U.S., but I think it's something that we're starting to make the inroads on and expect it to continue to double in size again in 2011. When you look at job growth and you look across our economy and what's going on in the United States, a lot of stagnation has happened. And we've watched things from manufacturing bases leave the United States. We've watched other type of job industries, and as we look at colleges here and as students and as all of us look at professionals on what are we going to do as future opportunities, the job growth in this industry is tremendous compared to what we see on the national average. You're looking at somewhere 1 to 2% on the national average, and you're looking in the solar industry that's growing at a much rapid pace at the 26% level. And the job growth that we see is very, we think about manufacturing as a part of it, as a manufacturer coming to Georgia. That's what most people first have in mind, but really the largest job growth in this industry is really those entrepreneurs that want to start a business and get into the installation and the sales and the business models. And the pockets of the country that are doing that successfully, such as some states up in the Northeast and of course California, they've really had successful models, and you're seeing companies grow from 0 up to 400 people just doing installations and solar type activities. So the opportunities are there. It's just a matter as we continue to come on board and take advantage of it, I think we'll continue to see the job growth go forward. Then when you look at total jobs and you compare it to gigawatt hours that can be produced from electricity, you'll look at solar PV as one of the fastest, as one of the leaders as far as the number of jobs that can be grown for the amount of output that you get from a power standpoint. Now the solar industry, and this is from the president and CEO of the Solar Industry Association, which is one of the watchdogs for this group, is basically really talked about how fast the industry is growing, and it is one of the fastest growing industries in the United States, and especially for opportunity for job growth, and as well as revenue growth for new business ventures and activities. One of the things we did is we came across into the United States, and we found out very quickly that the biggest piece of most all of these renewables that you find is the education of people really understanding what the opportunities they are for them to be able to use and to be able to use renewables in a different way. We've been so gridlocked and so tied in, and me being a native Georgian myself, and really not understanding sometimes how much we are tied into monopolies and some of the things that limit what we can do, that's hindering our growth and our ability to really grow. So, and the other side of it is just educating people. And then when people decide they want to go to something new, how do they find the activities and the opportunities to do that? So we put in our Maggie Solar Academy, which we did at about 1.5 years ahead of schedule, and we did that this past January and launched that to give industry professionals the opportunity to really get in this industry. And we've hosted classes and offered training for people from all parts and all regions of the United States. So why Georgia? Why did we come to Georgia as a manufacturer, and why would we select a state that, when you look on a grand scale of things, necessarily isn't into the renewables or trying to come onto the verge of getting into the renewable activity as what you see across different parts of the country or different parts of the world? Well, one thing, as we look around and chose an area, such a great, as Jill and some of the other ones have mentioned, a great economic development climate and great opportunity for the location that we picked to be at major interstates, at a major port, at a major international airport, so we could get back and forth between our sister facilities in Germany, but also around all the other major places in the United States, since we sell and market products all across the United States. So it's a really good opportunity for that, and plus all the major interstates to be able to transport and move product. The other side of it is, as I said, just excellent resources. From work ready all the way down to One Georgia authority and ability to be able to partner that stuff together, as well as the quick start programs. It's just a really great climate for someone coming to be a very pro-business climate to help generate and to get things kick-started. And the other side of it is, as I showed you on the irradiation grid, and you looked at the United States as far as a map, as an economic opportunity for a business to come into, and an area where we think, seeing what's happened and having the experience of what's taking place in Europe, is an area that really has an opportunity to really grow. And one of the biggest opportunities for the whole United States to grow is in the area of renewables. And especially from the experience of the solar photovoltaics, which is one of the easiest to get into that there is in the renewable market. The second thing is that you look at, Arizona State recently did a study, and if you look at where Georgia ranked in that study, both third and fifth, and when you look at that, they did an index, and they broke that index down to say what states could really benefit from the use of solar electricity. And actually Georgia ranked very high on that list as one of the major states that could generate from not only being a producer to actually be able to be used across different states, but also to be able to self-sustain within its own right. So I think as we continue to see, I know there's a lot of discussion with the senator a little bit earlier about, what policies and things going in place. There were some conversations about the PPA and the territorial acts. I can tell you from experience, because we see it across the country, that places that have already gotten that right and are already using it are generating job growth at a fast pace. And we've seen companies grow from almost nothing to $20 million businesses, to people grow from no employees to over 400 employees in the solar deployment right here in the United States. And I think Georgia will be one of those states as time comes on, you know, just to be discussing things like territorial acts and does things work or do they not work. And now that they do and recognizing those type things, I think it's just the verge and just the first steps to getting where we need to get. And I think that will continue to move forward as we keep moving forward as a state. So that's one of the reasons we're here, because we also think Georgia will be a fine state for solar output as well in the future. I want to thank you for your interest in Moggy Solar, and I look forward to any questions that you got for us.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, we're going to take a break now for about 10 minutes or 5 to 7 minutes of Q&A so that we can stay on schedule. Dr. Evans has to leave a bit early, so please, I'll take the first question. And we have microphones somewhere here.
Hi, I'm Jared Hayes on the faculty at the Nunn School. I had a question for the representative from GE. You mentioned that policy leads technology, and I wonder what responsibility companies have for pushing policy. So in the United States, there's been a division between companies that have resisted policy to address issues of climate change, and part of this is all part of the same discussion. And there have been some companies who have been willing to actually push for policies in favor of climate change. So I wanted to push you a little bit on that and suggest that maybe GE has obligations and responsibilities to push for policies that will, in the long run, benefit GE and the other companies that are involved here.
Are we going to collect? No. Okay. Thank you. Good question. I would actually say that it's not just a responsibility, it's in our interest. It's reflected if you look at what we've been doing over the last several years with our Eco-Imagination initiatives, also GE's active participation in founding and leading US CAP, which was a coalition of NGOs as well as companies trying to come to a consensus around what should be the US national carbon policy. So GE has been actively involved, not just in the carbon debate, but a whole range of issues. And it's an interesting back and forth discussion. We have deep technical knowledge of how technologies work. We have resources to do very detailed forward forecasts of what technology deployment would look like. And so we're often in discussions with industry, our customers, and with governments to share that information and knowledge. And so we're actively involved in many of these technology discussions and policy debates.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Okay, then. I would like to invite, I'm sorry, excuse me, yes, please.
For the person from GE, you're producing these wind turbines, but I've been led to, and I don't know how much you sell to the United States, or do you produce them in China and sell them to the United States? Because I understand lots of these turbines have come from China and not being produced here.
Our largest factory in the United States is in Greenville, South Carolina, so it's about 2.5 hours drive from here. It's where we produce most of them. We have a global supply chain, so certain components come internationally. And you know, if your goal is both to be a successful business and to deploy these technologies as rapidly as possible, you need to bring the cost down so they can compete against conventional fuels. And so when I mentioned the scale, it's partly this issue of how do you build an enterprise that can benefit and leverage basically globalization to be able to bring together products that you can diffuse successfully into the marketplace. And so We have built a global supply chain around wind. A big footprint of that is in the United States because the United States was a very big and important market. But we have facilities elsewhere around the world to serve those markets. Wind has certain characteristics in that the blades are very long, and so logistically it's very hard to have one facility to supply the world. And so there are other logistical reasons why you tend to have a more spread out manufacturing footprint as well.
Are you going to build any more plants in the United States other than the one in
We
Greenville?
actually have just announced our plans to build the largest solar factory in the United States. So a 300 megawatt solar factory. I just was speaking to our renewables team this morning, and they've told me that they have just shortlisted the number of states where we're going to potentially select. So that's a very exciting opportunity to be a 300 megawatt plant. And as the gentleman just mentioned, there's tremendous potential in the United States for solar, but we need supportive policies to drive that industry. And if those supportive policies come into place, I think the sky's the limit really on seeing solar take off. But those supportive policies are not quite there as you would see in Germany. Germany is really at the forefront in the world, and it would be great if some of the lessons from Germany can flow back into the U.S. We would love to see that policy deployment.
And I guess just one quick, the guy from Dublin
Yes,
that
ma'am.
has the plant here. What kind of support do you feel you're getting from the state legislature and the governor of the state for solar and dealing with Georgia Power, I guess, and being able to put solar panels on people's homes and businesses and apartments, et cetera, et cetera?
Some. The policies are not as good as what we see around the other parts of the country. There's different parts of the country that are extremely, that are growing their industries. They are growing jobs. They are at a rapid pace. And in the Northeast is probably the latest one. Of course, everybody knows the California stories, but the Northeast is the ones that have really taken off. And it's all been driven, around the recognition that it is a good thing, and that they've put in renewable portfolios. The states that have done that have been states that have really expanded their ability to grow jobs, and they allow people to get into markets and allow people to actually use the technology that is very apparent, that is very good, it's very reliable, that is all in place today for everybody to use. It's one of the technologies that's one of the easiest to get into now, and already to help produce something actually, and the return on investment now is continuing to improve every day, and the technology is continuing to improve from companies like GE and ourselves and others, and that you'll see in Siemens. But the situation is, it's really, the state is, the recent passage that went in place of basically the tax incentive or the rebate that they're going to put in place to double it was a step in the right direction. And I think it's a huge step and a huge recognition by the state of Georgia and the legislation to recognize that, hey, this stuff really works, and what other states are doing to generate jobs and to put people in employment, and also to generate new revenue streams for businesses. Georgia has really suffered from the housing market and the downturns of those type things, and the very people that can really benefit the most from this are those type companies that really get in looking for a new revenue stream and a new opportunity to put installers and workers and sales and marketing all back to work. So the states that are doing that, it is really, really doing well. Georgia is one of those states that's not on that RPS continuum yet, but it's one that at least is starting to recognize. And I even think when we're having debates around the tariffs and for the PPA activity, which has been huge in different parts of the country, that is starting to take off. I think maybe those debates will even lead to more awareness and more people getting involved. As the gentleman from Germany said, the more involvement people get into and the more they get educated, because usually it's an educational thing that people don't realize. That's going to drive more and more of the growth, and as he said, and more of the legislation looking favorably and allowing to open up the grid is the way I say it, because right now we're so limited with the grid.
Thank you. Well, that was Joe, your comments were a nice lead-in to our next speaker, Mr. Kostas Simoglu with the Georgia Department of Economic Development.
Thank you. My name is Kostas Simoglu, and I work with Jill Stacky. You heard her presentation earlier today describing how how important the bioenergy industry is in Georgia, and she has done tremendous work in that area. A few weeks ago, she asked me to join her group and deal with equally large segment of the energy industry, what we call the energy technology. My background is the technology industry. I got into it in 1986, and I worked for software industry, hardware industry, and then a little bit with the telecom industry before I joined the department. In that process, during the time, and now looking back, you had the software guys, one vertical, the hardware guys, one vertical, and the telecom industry sitting somewhere over there. They were the utility industries. And eventually, the software and hardware guys got together. Somebody here in Norcross, Georgia, developed the first modem, and now they start sending data over the phone lines. In the beginning, the phone companies liked it, but then eventually said, you're sending too much data. Our network cannot handle it. You're going against the laws of nature. So the geeks, as I call them, told the telecom industry, you're using wrong materials, wrong networks. And they went and changed their world. And in 20 years, the whole telecom industry has changed, and we've changed the way we communicate from 1991 to 2011, 20 years. So watching that paradigm shift, and then you mapping this on the energy industry, we sat down and we said, okay, who are the players? Let's understand the energy industry. And so we saw how we generate energy as humans, using petroleum products and coal and fossil fuels in general and very little renewable. And then we looked, how do we use this? And then how much of this is wasted? Again, this is not our graph. It came from the Department of Energy, from their laboratories. It took us a while to understand it and believe that about over 50% of the energy generated and used is wasted. With regards to electricity, 20-some% is wasted. Just imagine what kind of investment it will take to recapture this 20%, to generate 20% more energy, billions of dollars. So this is the problem, and this is the opportunity for us. And we said, okay, this is the human way of generating energy. Now let's compare this with what Mother Nature does. And it's been doing this for a few billion years. So for those who cannot see very far, the thing in the center here is the sun. So sun generates the energy, transmits it and distributes it to the earth. Earth stores it and uses it. So, and if we use that paradigm, that example, then on the energy generation, what kind of industries can be created? Wind, and then of course, adjust them to what our natural advantages are. Wind energy, solar energy, biofuels, as Jill explained earlier, fuel cells. There is a lot of research going on at Georgia Tech, and waste to energy. We have lots of waste. So with all these industries are created thousands of jobs. On the energy transmission and distribution, well, we have GE Energy and their smart grid division. We also used to have, or still have, a very large telecom cluster. These skills are transferable. So we believe that we have great strength and potential in developing the next generation smart grid technologies to manage the network more efficiently. And then on the side of storage were the batteries. I believe whoever comes with the best battery technology is the one that wins the game. And of course, with all this, in the usage, I call it conservation, in the usage side, you have all these other technologies and all these kind of industries that can be created altogether. So, of course, new materials for all this to be implemented. So, if we use these new models, if we use not new models, what Mother Nature is doing, and we interpret this to a business model, then we have a tremendous economic development growth. How do we do that? We cannot do it ourselves. We have to involve, and we've done this through the centers of innovation, as Jill explained to you earlier, is that we bring together the private industry first, the universities, and then the government to accomplish this. And going back into the old picture, into the previous picture, the inner circle here is that this is what the government's job is and what they can do. Number one, we have to make sure that we have the right workforce, make sure that we have ways to finance applied research and create new products, new ideas, new business models, and then make sure we have the right legislative framework that promotes this growth instead of prohibiting it. And again, we have the model here with the centers of innovation to make it happen. And what is our ultimate dream is to become an area where right now when you hear Silicon Valley or Hollywood or Wall Street, you automatically know what it's all about. We hope in the future that this area, not just in Georgia, but in the Southeast in general, will be known as a green tech corridor. Normally, you don't pick your own nickname, your other friends do, but in this case, we sort of picked our own names early enough, so we keep promoting it and we're working on it and making sure that we're connecting the dots among the right people. A right nickname will come up for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kostas. And our final panelist is Mr. Thomas Orberger of Siemens Industry, the business manager for the hybrid drives.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the last one. I'll make it short. I'm very honored to be part of this presentation today here, and I would like to give you a couple of examples and real-life examples of green jobs, green applications that we have done globally, and in particular here in the United States. But before I come to the goodies, let me give you some corporate facts and overviews. I like this 4-quadrant German slide. Forget the most part of it. Maybe a couple of things. Siemens is organized in 3 sectors. One sector is healthcare, the other sector is energy and industry, where I belong to. There will be, at the end of this fiscal year, there will be an additional 4th sector, which is dedicated to cities and infrastructure, and which is clearly dedicated to clean job and clean job growth. Then the company has roughly 405,000 employees worldwide. Here in the United States, roughly 60,000. I'm one of them. I'm located here in Alpharetta, Georgia. In the vicinity of Atlanta, we are roughly 2,500 employees. And we generate roughly 75 billion euros per year, roughly 100 billion US dollars per year, depending on the exchange rate. On this slide, one thing what I would like to point out, my company is for many, many years looking into green jobs and sustainability, and in 2010, we generated roughly 27.6 billion euros, which are dedicated to green jobs, systems and solutions, roughly 40 billion US dollars. And for 2014, our goal is to generate roughly 60 billion US dollars. So we are clear on the path to generate and to build globally green jobs, not only here in the United States. Here are a couple of examples for our green or environmental portfolio. We had a lot of talk about renewables. This is solar and wind energy. Then number 2, environmental technologies. Those are solutions and systems that provide, let me say, environmental solutions for existing applications, industry applications that we have. It's wastewater, air pollution, coal-fired plants. And then on the right hand, energy efficiency. This is something what we address in various parts of the industry. There's one, combined cycle power plants, industrial drive systems, where I'm coming from, and later on I give you a little bit more details. High voltage direct current traffic management solutions, everything what is related to transportation and traffic, very important for us. Efficient lighting, our Ostrom group is very active. I think everybody knows the light bulb, the classical light bulb, and the fluorescent light, one good example to save. And then energy performance contracting. Here, some innovative-driven growth sectors. That's more the view inside the company. There's solar technique in Africa and Europe. On the second side, too, smart grid. Our colleagues and friends from GE are also very, very active in this. One of the foundations to drive and to build infrastructure here in North America and other areas as well. Then smart products. That's an area where we provide sustainable solutions and systems in developing countries. And then the red part, this is the area where I am involved. And this is electromobility, this is e-car, transportation. And let me show you a couple of things, what we do. And I'm, in my position as Siemens, I present hybrid drives in North America. Our mission is very, very easy, provide sustainable powertrain solutions for the North American commercial vehicle market. So everybody knows trucks, buses, and commercial vehicles, they have an engine built in, they drive through fossil fuels. And my task and agenda and mission is really to drive alternative solutions, electrical solutions, fuel cell solutions, all kinds of derivatives to save greenhouse gases, to reduce greenhouse gases, to avoid greenhouse gases. Then energy security, I think it's in every discussion, away from oil. And then last but not least, American industrial leadership. And let me point out one thing. Japan took over roughly 10, 15 years the lead in personal vehicles and hybrid vehicles to drive sustainable and leading jobs. I believe the United States has a great chance to take the lead in commercial vehicles and commercial sustainable solutions. Here, that's my only technical slide that I would like to show you. This is how we see the transition from the existing solutions for commercial transportation over to a more sustainable solution. On the left hand, on the right side, you see a fossil-burning fuel vehicle. And then over time, depending how energy storages, batteries will improve, economy of scale will hit us, we will move to the right hand. And if you go into the middle section, you see a pure battery-driven vehicle. By the way, I arrived today with a zero-emission, pure electric vehicle. I invite you after this event to take a look and to see. So I saved 25 pounds coming down, 25 pounds greenhouse gases coming from Alpharetta to this event. Small contribution, but a contribution. And then on the right hand, you see pure fuel cell applications and fuel cell applications. So, and I would like to show you in the rest of the presentation a couple of examples that we have done globally and as well here in the United States, which are already present in this application. But I would like to start from an area of public transportation. This is where we have grown over the last 10 years, sustainable solutions. And there are a couple of information. Just keep the red numbers in mind. You have on the left hand, you have a conventional metro transit bus, which consumes roughly 3.8 gallons, or achieves 3.8 miles per gallon. If you move over to the right hand, you see a compressed natural gas or LNG propelled gas. It's equivalent 3.6 miles per gallon. It's a little bit less, but it burns cleaner. It's getting interesting if you look on the diesel hybrids and all electric vehicles. You see there's 5 miles per gallon, and for an all electric bus, it's 7.1 equivalent miles per gallon. So there are clear ways to save and to reduce our dependency on oil, but it doesn't come for free, it costs money. You see here the diesel saved down there. So that's basically the underlying foundation and the underlying, let's say, business case to drive this business. We have done this very successful over the last 10 years here in North America, mainly driven in Southern California. Legislation has been in place there to promote and to help this business, and subsidies through the Federal Transportation or Transit FDA, Federal Transportation Administration, who has subsidized those kinds of projects, helped to jumpstart the industry, which has right now a 30% penetration on sustainable solutions. And you can see it here. In 1995, the majority of buses was conventional. There was a little bit CNG or natural gas. Then in 2000, there was some others. And then in 2005, it started really to jumpstart. Hybrid application, hybrid buses took off. Now we're in 2011. So I would assume that in the next 4 or 5 years, the majority will be hybrid or all-electric buses. And you see here greenhouse buses share is growing, but still less than 50%. I'm very, very positive. There's legislation, there are initiatives in Washington, D.C. ongoing really to drive and promote this technology. So now some promised examples here. This is a truck which we did with PACCAR. PACCAR is a North American truck manufacturer. That's a project in Belgium. It's a very interesting project, and the business case here, or the business model here, was really not necessarily to provide sustainable or green transportation. Our customer had just one need: to deliver without emissions and without noise in the evening some grocery chains. So what we provided there was a hybrid all-electric blend. This vehicle goes into the city on battery power, delivers without noise, with any pollution, and as soon as it leaves the city, it provides and runs on a diesel-electric or hybrid application similar to the Prius. Here, an example out of the UK. I don't like this bus. I think it's ugly, but it's a battery bus driving passengers in southern England. Good example. Several of those vehicles are in operation. Here, a fuel cell project that we realized with Ballard to the Olympic Games in Vancouver. There are 20 fuel cell buses in operation in Vancouver. It's a combination of a fuel cell battery with our drivetrain. Excellent example for zero emission and for an applicable technology. Here an example of a conventional diesel hybrid in Las Vegas, also equipped with our system, 50 buses, running very, very successful on saving everyday fuel and reducing emissions. And here, that's our small commercial vehicle. It's a Ford vehicle, contains our drivetrain. We use this vehicle internally in our company north of Atlanta for our postal route. We save every day 44 pounds in greenhouse emissions, and I got the chance to drive it down here today. So again, I invite you to come by and take a look. Here, an example which is a European project which we try to transfer or try to find applications as well in North America. This is a project which is subsidized by the Bundesministerium for Environment and Nuclear Safety, and it presents an electrified highway system. So we were talking in the company as Siemens, what kind of applications can we provide to the industry to reduce greenhouse emissions and to make it affordable? And this is a project which is right now in implementation. We built in the eastern part of Germany an airport strip of roughly 2 miles where we test those vehicles. Those are standard OEM vehicles with an add-on for the electrical drivetrain to see how this technology is applicable. We did calculation for the investment to electrify the entire Autobahn network in Germany. I cannot disclose this amount, but it's bearable and it's applicable. We introduced this concept to a couple of communities and transit authorities here in the United States, and in particular in areas where you have short trips, 30 miles, 40 miles, in harbors like in Los Angeles and Long Beach, where there is a large congestion, pollution, unbearable. Those kind of concepts are receiving a lot of feedback, and we will see in the next 4 or 5 years how this technology can be implemented. That's a little bit out of mine. I'm focused on the vehicle side and everything which goes into the vehicle, but we work in our large organization with other groups, with our mobility division that's doing trains and all kinds of infrastructure application, to provide this concept which provides the financing, the operational concept, basically the one-stop solution to operate this kind of system. Green transportation supports the OS economy. Just for me, I hired in the last 12 months 4 engineers in my group. We have decided to localize manufacturing of components to our factory in Alpharetta, Georgia, to support the US market with this. There are more jobs will be created. It reduces the need for imported oil. I've shown you clearly examples how you can reduce your fuel consumption, reduces CO2 emissions, of course, and provides stability to entice continued private investment in green technologies. This is very important for us to drive this further into the market. And then grows the manufacturing infrastructure to enhance export opportunities. Because we see here in our location, we don't see this only receiving, we are looking really actively to export from Georgia, here from the United States, into other parts of the country, the technology that we build here, that we have innovated and manufactured. That's for my part. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
Yep.
20 years ago, I was living in Strasbourg and I was skiing in Zermatt. I almost got run over by a completely silent bus. I was not waiting to get hit by a bus. It was running on solar power, and the back seat was a very large, underneath the back seat cushions was a very large battery. And if a narrow valley like Zermatt can get solar energy sufficient enough to run a bus, where did all the solar buses go, and why are we waiting on them now?
You know, we don't see necessarily here in the US solar buses as the leading way. We see battery buses combined with an intelligent infrastructure, ultra cab buses or transportation, as a viable way and practical way to implement. So basically you have an energy storage in your vehicle, and you have, for instance, on a bus, you have a fixed route. You do a stop, you have a fast charging capability, you charge the battery or the ultra cab or the energy storage, and then you move on to the next station. So there are already in Southern California applications in place. I think Foothill Transit Authority has one all-electric bus in operation. They have at the end, on both ends and in the middle, one recharging station, and they operate those buses like a standard transit bus with CNG or diesel. So basically from an investment perspective and return of investment, this seems to be the most applicable solution at the moment.
So a place like Las Vegas, which obviously has huge insulation value, it doesn't make sense to have solar panels on the bus in addition to the electric infrastructure in the bus. And you end up with a vehicle autonomous. The vehicle can be more autonomous in its movements as well, not being so dependent upon recharging where it goes, and it could have the potential to uploading its energy that it creates as it moves about. So these weren't existing 20 years ago, so why did they fail?
Cost. And I would say, you know, even if you have a solar panel on top of your bus, you need an energy storage. And the energy storage is by far the most expensive element in any kind of hybrid or all-electric vehicle. So I would assume prices come down for batteries and the economy of scale is there, I think this solution will be revisited and may show its merits.
Yes, in the back.
Thanks. My question is for Mr. Simgaloof of the Center of Innovation for Energy. My name is Leonard Morrow from 2M Design Consultants. Over the last 10 years, my commercial construction management firm has done well focusing on lead documentation and administration of high-performance buildings for local governments and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We are now adding life cycle analysis of building assemblies using the Athena Eco Calculator as a new service. It's very complex and it's still developing. My question is, what can your organization do to help commercialize a service like life cycle analysis? Thank you.
Well, normally, what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect you with entities at the University System of Georgia. I mean, I don't know if we can help you specifically for that particular project that we have. We normally, for example, will deal with Georgia Tech when somebody has a battery technology that needs to take it to the next level. That's where we have joint R&D funds, and we fund some of it and so forth and take it to the next level. That's a little bit very specific. It's a service, and we haven't done service before. We 100% of our work has been on product specific. Jill, you have any idea?
Okay, you all can probably hear that the reception is being set up, and we are a little bit behind, so I'll just take one final question, and then hopefully you will all stay and enjoy conversation with our panelists afterwards during the reception. One final question.
The power grid that was foisted on us back in the early 1900s by General Electric and a few other small companies, because they decided you can sell more equipment if you have long power lines and big generators and hydroelectric plants and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where do we stand with the decentralization of the power grid in view of the fact that solar and biodiesel and most of these other technologies, wind, basically rely on batteries and don't require long power lines to pump electricity from New York to Los Angeles?
Well, our representative from GE Energy has left the room. I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to tackle that question or offer a comment.
I think the answer, I think he answered it a few minutes ago. I think it's really in battery technology. And if you talk to any company that's doing battery technology, we're not there. And when that technology gets there, that's when you're going to see a great chasm and a great change in the paradigm across this country and across the world. Because what you just described is many of the limitations that the senator talked about that goes on in the United States, and it goes on that many of the countries, the reason some of these technologies aren't embraced and they just aren't mainstream and they're not as prevalent as what we know they can be and what we all have experiences with is because of that, is because of the legislatures, the things that have been put in place that have been long-standing for years and years and years. But when the battery technology really gets there, it's kind of like I tell you, utility companies and things like this, all of this, we can all work together. You need a portfolio when you're looking at energy management and you're looking to provide energy across the board. Renewables, all the renewables are part of that. But when the battery technology gets there, it's a game changer, because if it does, then everybody can go off grid and do what you want to do, which is a much different paradigm than what we have today. But when that technology will reach, it's hard to say. And when it'll be cost effective is really the big key.
I agree. I believe it's all in the battery technology, and I can tell you from what I see within 10 years, every house is going to come with a battery and energy generation connected with a smart grid in the whole subdivision, share energy going from one to another, and it's going to be much simplified, and that's where the distributed power comes in.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our superb panelists this afternoon.